Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at Hela and see how much better she is with her new uniform and her T3 upgrade. Hela has been in the game for a while now, but she has basically had no use because she was criminally underpowered, and the only real value that you could get from having her Ragnarok uniform is that she had a passive which increased the damage that you dealt to heroes and decreased the damage you received from heroes. So if you had that uniform in the past, you basically only used her as a support for World Boss Ultimate stages that had heroes in them, or possibly in things like Timeline or Alliance Conquest just to get a small support there. However, with this mid-month patch, her newest uniform takes that passive to the extreme and makes her a fully playable and usable character across the board in all content. And when I say that, I mean she is almost essentially meta in the majority of the modes in the game as it currently stands from the testing that I did. As you'll see in a little bit, her newest artifact makes her unkillable, and if you're lucky to get it at 6 stars, she's unkillable for a duration of 7 seconds. If you've fought a Wolverine that had that similar unkillable effect in the previous updates, you'll know just how useful the artifact is and how much of a difference it makes, especially in PvP content. And that's just one of the reasons why she's good for PvP, but for PvE, she also can use that passive which was bumped up. She also has a great leadership, and she's a pretty great standalone character. But you don't have to take my word for it, that's why I did the testing. These are what my card stats look like, and you've probably seen something very similar in the past, though with Black Friday rolling through this past week, I took the advantage of changing up some of my card stats, and I managed to bump my pierce damage from 16% up to 22%. So I basically was able to gain 6% more pierce on my card set. I was also able to get roughly around 10% basic defense, so that should help me a little bit in PvP. I'm hoping to bump that value up a little bit more to be a little bit trickier to take down, but not much else changed besides that. Considering the artifact for Hela was so good for PvP, and I already know how much it helps Wolverine, I decided to take her into Timeline right away with basically no build. So I only have that artifact at 6 stars since I have the selector from the Black Friday events, but I don't have anything else on the character besides an obelisk, I think, that has invincible for 4 seconds and guard break immunity. So besides the artifact and the custom gear, I have obviously no CTP, no Urus, no ISO 8 set, and the uniform is only at normal. As you can see in that last clip, which I'm repeating, I lost the fight, but the purpose wasn't to see if I could win the fight, it was to see how well she would do against my brilliant team that I have in Timeline Challenger. I already knew that she would struggle a bit versus Doom since he iframes a lot and she doesn't have any iframe ignore, so I wanted to see if she could kind of do a little bit versus him. But as you can see, her passive really helps her out versus Sentry, and her 3 skill that has the accumulation can essentially one-shot him even if you don't have a finished build or a damage proc. So for the next test, I wanted to see how well she would do against an all-hero team, especially one that had Gilgamesh on it with a support like Colossus, since he's already notoriously very tanky and hard to take down with most teams. You just saw me one-shot Sentry with that 3rd skill, and because the damage accumulation persists onto her next skills, the 4 and 5, you can see just how hard hitting her skills can be overall, since I'm able to take down Gilgamesh with ease. Playing back that clip in slow motion, you can get a better sense of what happened. So Sentry respawns, and his burst damage was able to essentially kill me, but because I had her artifact, and you can see that it activates there with the orange icon and the 7 on it, I'm able to survive, which highlights the importance of the artifact itself. You can also note that versus Gilgamesh, I only have Hela's lead and support to take him down, since Ebony Maw does nothing versus him, considering that he's not a universal type. Which means that if I went for another support like Mystique or Taskmaster that adds damage to all kinds of characters, or if I added something like Colossus support, then I can essentially make her hit even harder or be tankier overall. For this third test, I take her up against another Eternal character, so instead of testing versus someone like Gilgamesh, which is really tanky, I wanted to see how she could do versus a character like Icarus, which tends to iframe a lot and hit through opponent iframes, or my own character's iframes. Icarus usually uses his fourth skill a lot, which has the invincible and the iframe ignore, but Hela's 4 and 5 kind of move her around a lot, which makes her avoid damage, and because that 3 is so quick with the counter, it can wipe out characters fairly quickly. Last time I did a review for a character in Timeline or PvP in general, someone asked if I could also incorporate how to play the character manually, and from my experience in the short time that I tested Hela, the best way to play her is basically just to spam her iframe skills. So that would be her 5, 4, and 1. So you basically just want to spam those and stay in them and not really cancel them, since you can just rotate through being an iframe almost permanently. If you're gonna anticipate a hit, then use the third skill as often as it is up and you are about to take a hit. It will give you that insane damage accumulation and wipe out the opponent even faster. I also wanted to note that by spamming the 5, 4, and 1, you fill up your ultimate a lot faster, even though I don't have her. So if you haven't noticed, the character isn't even T3 yet, and I'm taking out all of these really strong characters in PvP as it is. But yeah, spamming the 5, 4, 1, and 3 will fill up your ult faster, and because the 5 and 4 kind of move you around all over, it'll help you avoid taking damage, and because the 5 and 4 have a heal on it, you'll basically keep healing up to essentially max health the whole time. And if the opponent goes into a long iframe, try to spam the fourth skill in between the little gaps of the iframe so that you can stay in your own really long iframe. So that gave you a quick idea of what the character can do in PvP without the T3 and without a finished build. The next thing I'm going to look at is what the character can do with a finished build in PvE, and then again how much better she performs in PvP and the difference that a fully built up character can make. Looking at her skills in skill preview, the first skill does a total of 7 hits. The second does a total of 5 hits. The third skill actually does no hits if you don't get hit, but if you do get hit, it does 22. The fourth skill does a total of 40 hits and can be cancelled, but shouldn't be until after she lands, since the damage continues. The fifth skill hits 29 times and can be cancelled to an extent, but it doesn't make too much sense since you want to stay in at least one skill. And finally, the amazing ultimate skill, which hits a whopping 77 times, is one that you definitely do not want to cancel. In terms of our kit, the ultimate has the ability to increase the rate of your accumulation after you use it, and has that awesome 150% increased damage to the skill itself. This, coupled with the 77 hits, is one of the reasons why you do not want to cancel the ultimate skill. Her tier 2 passive now gives 30% guaranteed dodge, 40% defense, and 25% reduced damage from all sources, which is very noticeable in PvP. She also gets super armor, which combined with her artifact that keeps her alive, makes it so that you can essentially use any CTP you want. So even if you build her for PvE, she'll be able to function in PvP to some extent as well. Her third skill then has that amazing damage accumulation of 15%, similar to Sharon Rogers, for damage taken, and she gets the added little bit of survival with 4 seconds of 100% immunity to all damage. To add to that, she gets the counter attack on this skill, which is very nice for PvP, even though it isn't an iframe ignore. They kind of learned their lesson with these skills and made them kind of short animations so the characters aren't just standing around all the time, and they added a lot of good effects to the skills so that even if the counter effect doesn't activate, the skill has very good use regardless. The fourth skill is the one that you want to use right after the third skill, since it gives you that increased skill damage and bonus damage for 8 seconds, and it also has effects like decreasing defenses, which ignores immunity, as well as the additional healing and paralysis for things like ABX. Then the 5th skill furthers your healing with another activation of 15%, as well as 4 seconds of invincible and the incapacitation effect for PvP. The effects don't stop there though. Her tier 1 passive gives her 50% all resist, which makes her even more versatile for PvP since she'll be able to ignore damage from elemental characters. Then the reduced reflect damage of 50% makes her even trickier to take down if you just decide to throw a reflect pylon like Destroyer at her. She'll be able to maneuver past that a little bit better. And finally, she also gets the 20% chain hit damage increase, which makes her ultimate and a bunch of the other skills hit much harder for PvE content, but also for PvP. She also has a self-buffing leadership, which gives all allies a whopping 60% energy attack, and best of all, the uniform passive, which gives you up to 50% increased damage versus heroes and 30% reduced damage from them. This isn't that great for PvE content since most of the bosses are villains, but it is one of, if not the best buff that you can get for PvP, especially for something like Timeline. Lastly, looking at the stats for our artifact, if you can get the 6-star version of it, you can get up to 50% of your health back after you die, and you get to live for 7 additional seconds from the point that the character died. So a lot of tools to work with for PvP. Anyways, after covering my card stats, the hit count for her skills, and what her kit looks like, I can better describe how to play her in PvE and recommend builds to you for her. The current test that I'm doing in PvE, I have no damage proc. The only CTP that I'm currently using, which I equipped for PvP testing later, is a CTP of regeneration, so no damage proc. I also started off at stage 60 as opposed to my usual stage 50 since I did gain that 6% extra pierce on my cards, and I realized that she has her own leadership obviously, but I'm using She-Hulk here so that I can later on comparatively see how she performs against other characters that don't have a leadership, like for example Sif or Heimdall. In terms of her rotation, the one that I would recommend and the one that I tested is to use your 3rd skill at the moment when you think you're about to take damage and just let that play out. And then after you've done the 3rd skill, go into your 4th skill till she hits the ground, and then go into your 5th skill. After those skills are up, you basically just do 1 and 2 filler till you get your 3rd up, and then you repeat the cycle again of 3, 4, 5. In terms of a build and maximizing her damage, I don't really see something like a CTP of energy working for her because she has a lot of lingering effects on her skills, and her 3rd skill basically instant activates with 22 hits, which could trigger the proc and you would miss your opportunity to stack up the 4 and 5. Taking that into consideration, a CTP of Rage is likely your best bet and the easiest one to utilize her. If you really want to use her in PvE but don't really care for maximum damage, you could also try something like a CTP of Greed, or possibly even a CTP of Destruction, since you can get that penetration and use her in PvP content as well. It would be pretty interesting to see how a CTP of Energy would work for her ultimate specifically, since she has so many hits and she gets the added chain hit from that CTP as well as having it in her own passive. However, even though the damage would likely be cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs on that ultimate skill, for her regular rotation it likely wouldn't fare as well. Anyways, on Thanos stage 60, with no T3 and a suboptimal team, I'm able to finish the fight with 1 minute and 44 seconds remaining. When you get around to T3 her stat bump is actually pretty decent. Her health jumps up to 30,000 for base health, and her damage jumps up to 12,000 for base damage. Since my maxed out build was nearly completed, I went from 42,000 energy damage to almost 60, and her HP went from around 72,000 to over 100. If you're thinking, wow, those are pretty good stats, it's because my build is stacked. So I really like Asgardian characters. Thor is my favorite character, so I spared no expense to upgrade these characters as high as I could. And as you can obviously see, I got Hela to rank 1. With that aside, looking at the rotation for her when you have the ultimate skill unlocked, The rotation that you want to consider is very similar to when you don't have the ultimate, which is that you do the 3 when you're about to take the most damage or just damage in general. Then you go into 4 after you hit the ground, go into your 6th skill. From that point, just sit back and watch the health bars fly. Now, I don't know how the damage on this ultimate compares to other ultimates, though I would wager that it is one of the highest damaging ultimates in the game, similar to Sharon Rogers, and could potentially be the highest one. Though I don't want to state that outright, that is just something that I suspect, given the amount of damage that I'm seeing from an ultimate with no damage proc activation. With the stat bump and the T3 unlocked, I'm able to finish the same content a minute and 18 seconds faster than before. Because Thanos has so many interruptions that limit the timer once I got that upgrade, I also took her into Null stage 25 with her own leadership and 2 supports, and again no damage proc, to see just how well she would fare. I was a little bit skeptical that she would be able to complete stage 25 even with her own damage, lead, and 2 supports, and I was pleasantly surprised at the result that I got. The reason that I was skeptical is that when I T3'd her, I immediately took her into Null first before going to Thanos, and her regular rotation wasn't really doing that much damage. But when I saw the damage for the ultimate skill, the difference it made was night and day. In the past updates that we've got, a large majority of characters have gotten ultimates that have been less than iconic and usually can be cancelled as if it is a regular skill, and then the character would go into their rotation with their regular skills. So it's really refreshing to see that we get a completely original ultimate animation, and the fact that it hits very hard and is a skill that you want to stay in and experience. I'm hoping that in the future we get more like this, even though I know it's not realistic to ask for it with so many characters in the game. Considering that her base kit and skills are pretty straightforward, and despite the fact that I have a really good card setup and team setup, I was still surprised to see that she could complete stage 25 of Null with at least 40 seconds remaining. If you want to get an idea of how she might do in Alliance Battle Extreme, I also took her into Squad Battle, and I know it's not really the same thing since Squad Battle is more reliant on pierce damage, and Alliance Battle Extreme or Alliance Battle isn't really impacted too much by pierce damage and only really has an impact once you go over a certain point, which is around 8 million or something like that. I ended up scoring around the 7.5 million mark, as you might have guessed, with no damage proc, but considering that the pierce damage has more effect than Squad Battle, in Alliance Battle that number would probably be closer to around the 6 million mark. The last thing I did was take her up against the same teams that you saw in the beginning of the video, but this time with my rank 1 build. The current CTP that I'm using for her is a Mighty Regen with Penetration. The reason that I'm using this CTP over the other ones is because it synergizes with her semi-high base health and her constant healing from her 4th and 5th skill, as well as her artifact healing her to 50% health, which gets increased even further with the recovery from the CTP. As you can see, Doom is still a problem for her because of his constant iframes and her lack of iframe ignore, but she can potentially take him out. You can see that in this same test, which I repeated, but this time with a different outcome. The reason that the outcome was different is because Hela filled up her ultimate skill, which you might think is possibly luck, but her AI constantly spams 3, 5, and 4. And because I have a regen on, that 5 and 4 constantly heal me to high health, so she can survive long enough to go into her ultimate frequently, especially if that artifact is a high level, like level 5 or 6. Also, if you go with a Mighty Regen like I have, it's very important that you get that penetration effect, because you want her to constantly be interrupting the opponent to knock them out of the iframes, so that she can counter them with her 3rd skill, take the damage, and either insta-kill them with the 3rd skill, or have enough damage accumulated to kill them with the 5, 4, or other skills. You could potentially also use something like a CTP of Authority, especially with that steal effect, to make her survive just as long, but a CTP of Authority does have damage accumulation for damage taken, And like I've mentioned in my other videos, because her third skill also has the same effect, you risk potentially overlapping those effects and not getting the best value from them. I can't confirm or deny if this is how it works, but that's one of the things you risk if you go with the CTP Authority. That said, it is definitely a viable option, and because she has super armor in her kit and she iframes a lot, you could potentially also use a CTP of Transcendence. Keep in mind that the testing I did at the beginning of the video was with an Invincible Obelisk with guard break immunity, so that gives you a little bit of an idea how that works for her, despite the fact that the build wasn't finished. As for a damage proc, because of that artifact and because she constantly heals, iframes, and moves around, you can use that as well, so you can go with something like a CTP of Destruction for the penetration, or even a CTP of Greed, or potentially even the PvE options if you want to get a little bit value from her PvE build in PvP with those. But just keep in mind that from the testing that I did, that you can see here, I was able to one-shot most characters with her 3 skill or other skills once that 3 and damage accumulation activated, so I didn't find a damage proc was that necessary. Besides that, if you go with a damage proc, her survival will be comparatively less, so that means that you have a lower possibility of going into your ultimate ability and taking out characters that she normally struggles with. You saw that versus strong villains, especially a Doom with a Brilliant Authority, she isn't as consistent in winning against, but if you take her up against hero characters, that passive, or rather uniform passive, does a lot of work for her, and she barely has any issues fighting them at all. You can see in this video that very strong hero characters like Sentry, which is a staple for Timeline, she has no difficulty against, and even very tanky characters like Gilgamesh can essentially be one-shot like any other hero character that she fights. Again, I'm showing the fights that I showed at the beginning of the video to just highlight how much better she is with a full build, and how much faster she's able to take out the opponents. Also keep in mind that my character at the beginning of the video was only level 70 without the T3, so the stat bump obviously does a lot of work as well, not only being able to do more damage, but you can see that she's barely moving under the half health mark. And in these last fights versus just the hero characters, she didn't even activate her artifact or get close to it. If you noticed in these videos, I didn't even delay the fight in the beginning to try to get my skills up, since she was so dominant versus them. So regardless of whether you use the character as the primary damage dealer on your Timeline squad, the support alone that she provides is going to be very useful, and I can foresee her being in a lot of Timeline squads. To give you an idea of how she might do in Alliance Conquest in a 3 vs 3 setting, I took her into the Master of Shadowlands stage where another player sets a team up for another opponent to fight, and as you can see, she can solo a character like Mephisto that constantly iframes, and it's not even close. Her artifact never activates, and she takes out both lives with ease. So I wouldn't really be surprised in Alliance Conquest when she ends up soloing full teams by herself, especially when that ultimate charges up so fast and activates. Before I end the video, here's a little bit of a sneak peek on what you can expect from the next characters that I've already finished testing, but it takes a little bit of time to put together the videos. So the next one that I'm going to be covering is Heimdall, which is kind of funny because I've been hearing some people say that he's not that great, but I've had really good experiences with the testing that I did for him. And then the character that I'll be looking at after that is Sif, and how she does obviously in PvP and PvE, but she seems to be more on the PvE side, so I'll see how she does comparatively in ABX, since that's one of the things that people will more than likely use her for. But yeah, if you're paying attention to the clip in the background, Heimdall is surprisingly good if you know how to use him, and he can do some pretty amazing stuff in PvP, and also does function relatively well in PvE content too, which, like I just mentioned, is where Sif will really shine. Anyways, that's the video. I'm glad that we finally got an Asgard update to upgrade some of these characters that were forgotten, and all 3 got really good upgrades, as you'll see in the next videos, with Hela being basically meta in a lot of modes now. I'll also cover the changes to Thena and show you how much better she got with those a little bit after, But that pretty much wraps up this video. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll try to get back to them as soon as possible. Consider joining the Discord, since you can ask questions there as well, and there's other people that can answer. And if you like the video, please consider liking and subscribing so that I know you guys enjoyed the video and I can continue making more videos like this. Thanks again for your time and watching, but the video is now over.